I use that word very loosely. It is a presentation, but my goal is actually to make sure we have some time for some good engagement. I'm excited to hear, what resonates with you or what feels true for you inside of this topic. I think it's super important that when we come together in these environments that we're using the time to connect, to have that opportunity to share experience. I always say I have one voice to lend to this conversation, but we have 49 people on this call at the current, well, 51 people on this call at the current moment. So I know you all have valuable insights to provide into the conversation. So I actually don't have a ton of slides. I just have some thoughts and ideas about how we support our influence as leaders and have that opportunity to lead from a space that feels more like influence and less like pulling teeth or getting, always feeling like we have to check in or, get people to come along with us. How do we do that with more ease and with more of that, that influence that we want? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. And I'm going to open my chat and move it to my second screen. So if I look over here, it's because I'm looking at my chat. I really am looking forward to hearing from you and your ideas and perspectives on this topic, and in particular, some of the different sort of models and theories that we talk about related to it. So as Amy said, I started my career as a registered dietitian and an Army officer. So I went right in first career, had quite a bit of leadership responsibility that quite frankly, I probably wasn't well prepared for, right? I had a lot of skills. I had a lot of skills as a dietitian, but when it came to leading others, that had been less of a focus of any type of training or education that I had done at that point in my life. And when I think about it now, I'm still working with a lot of leaders who have grown into leadership positions, but who've had a lot more technical training than leadership training. And I think it's really important to honor that and then think about how we can help people invite leadership development into their role on top of the busyness of the work and the tasks that we're required to do. So anyway, I started my career as an Army officer and a registered dietitian. So I've spent a lot of time in a big system, hierarchical, government-based. I was a registered dietitian, which means in the military, that's about 50% military and 50% civilian. So I have a lot of experience leading in DoD. And then a lot of my consulting and training that I've done since I got out of the Army in 2012 has also been in the federal government. And so when I'm thinking about these topics, I think about them both from big organization, hierarchical structures, as well as I work a lot with nonprofits and small teams as well. So kind of looking at that balance between those two different types of systems. So we're going to talk about amplifying your influence. Before we even get into it, I would say this is like the content I came with, but what's really important to me is to know what you would like to get out of this time together. So when you signed up for the training and you were like, this would be helpful, what were you hoping to get out of the time together? What would make this a really good use of your time? And if you can just pop that in the chat, I would love to hear from you. And I also like to say two things. One, I often teach things like I think you should believe everything I have to say. I don't believe that at all. My invitation to you is actually just to entertain some of these ideas, try them on, see what works for you, take what you can use, and you can leave the rest behind. And I also like to say I'm a very patient facilitator, so I will ask for quite a bit of participation in the chat, and I'll give you time to offer it. All right, so we've got some things coming in here now. Yeah, tips and best practices to help others. Tips for leading when you're not in a management position. Managing up delicately. how to help others rebuild a tarnished brand, easing the transition from team member to supervisor. Yeah, learning more about leadership roles. Currently not in a leadership position. Preparing to step into management roles, improving communication with a variety of people. Yeah, these are great. And I love to hear that these are things that are top of mind as you're thinking about leadership and you're thinking about ways of working with people, preparing to have that higher level of authority in a role, potentially looking at moving into leadership positions. Encourage people to take initiative. Yeah, how to communicate with others in different types of positions. Great. Yeah, so you can keep those coming. And also an invitation to you is if we're talking about something and it would be helpful for you to hear a little bit more on that topic, please feel free to take yourself off mute and come on the line and ask your question. Again, y'all don't want to hear me talk for the next like 45 minutes, right? We'll want to so we invite other voices onto the line as well. All right, just going back up. All right. So now, before we even get into this, like when you think about the word influence, what do you feel like we can create when we have a higher level of influence? Like, what are some words that come to mind that you associate with influence? Yeah. Impact, motivation, inspire, change, mentoring, persuading. Yeah, being an example, productivity. So there will be times when the chat gets away from me. I promise. Like I try to like touch on the things that come in here. I won't read them all, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a value add. So please do keep it coming. Yes. Inspiration, impact, feeling heard, trust, so important. Yes. All right. So I want you to hold that as we go through our time together. I mean, I know you all know this because you are all in the training space. So I know I'll say things you're like, yes, Laura, we know that, right? This is what we do. But I'll just say it too, just it reinforces, what we know, and maybe it helps us think about it a little bit differently. But I just want to invite you to hold what feels important to you today, because that will help you identify which pieces you really want to take forward or which pieces are really going to create some impact for you. So just kind of hold when you think about what brought you here today and what influence means for you. Or when we think about like, I'd like to have more influence, like sort of the why around that, right? Like, what does that create for us when we have more of that? So we're going to go ahead and hop in. Something I just kind of want to say to preface this is that I look at leadership very much as how we create positive impact for the people who work with us and around us. So I think a lot about the experience of work when I think about leadership, and I think a lot about the human side of work. So I often will say, like, I don't talk about leadership, I talk about how we human together in the workplace, because we are living in a world, the workplace is changing, people's expectations and what people are willing to stick around for in the workplace is changing. And in order to stay with sort of the current needs of the workplace, I truly believe that we're shifting toward that. Like, what do the humans need, right? So if I say leader, I'm talking to you because you care about the human side of work. It doesn't matter what your role is. It doesn't matter what your title is. Obviously, those things hold importance in a lot of ways, but when it comes to influence, it's part of what we're talking about, leading beyond authority. It's how do we have influence outside of our role? So when we think about the work world and we think about probably the work world that we learned about, heard about, or entered into when we were earlier in our careers, depending on how long you've been in your career, the work world and the way we held influence and the way we held authority was very much from a hierarchical structure and very much a ladder, right? It's like we all want to climb the ladder. We are all, if we're in a GS organization, obviously we have the formal structure by which our roles are assigned, or we sort of navigate our careers. Obviously, that's very deeply embedded in the military and in our federal structures and in a lot of organizations. So our roles in our organizations are organized in this hierarchical climb the ladder, take that next step, climb the rungs. And the higher I stand on that ladder, the more authority I have. Right? Does that resonate? Because that's something we've seen in our work, something that we have felt. Right? And I think a lot of us think like, okay, once I get into that role, I'll have more influence. When I get on that higher rung, I'll be able to have more impact. People will do what I say. We'll be able to move the work forward. I'll get the chance to make decisions, right? Has anybody ever thought that or felt that in your career? So I'm also curious, like, if that's what you actually have experienced, right? Like, once we've climbed the ladder, we've gotten to that point, has it been what we envisioned when we got there? And I think more and more, I'm seeing leaders who are feeling a bit frustrated because they're not getting necessarily the motivation or the movement in the organization or the sort of adherence to directives. I mean, it's a little bit of a maybe some intense language there, but really it's like, wait, I thought when I got here things would get easier, right? I thought when I was able to move into this, I would have more of that control, right? But for many people, it's actually not the case. And what I am finding in this kind of model that I'm working with the leaders I work with, is how do we move from looking at influence and authority from this top-down approach? And let me just say, I'm not saying like disrespect the roles and the titles. I'm not saying they don't matter. They matter very much, and they create access to resources in a way that, has more responsibility and gives us that opportunity to lead our teams. I think those pieces are very important. But I think what doesn't get enough attention, and I think what's truly moving people into action, is instead of seeing ourselves at a top of a ladder, seeing ourselves as the drop in the puddle, and that our influence comes from what resonates out. Right? So if we looked down on the top of a ladder, what we would see an organization kind of stretching out like a pyramid more, right? And I think about like, what is that impact we're having with how we show up? What's resonating out from our energy as leaders? And what is the impact it has on how well people feel motivated, inspired, connected to us, how much people want to show up for our vision and our leadership and what we are creating in our spaces. So I'd love to hear from a couple of people. Yes, the Franklin Covey, I have the circle of influence, like you checks in the mail, Migdalia, like it's on the like a few slides away, right? Because it's so important for what we bring to our spaces as leaders. So I'm curious, from being a team member, not necessarily being in a leadership role, but being someone who has found yourself influenced by other people, how this kind of resonates with you, or how this kind of connects with what you've experienced. Is anybody willing to come on the line and share a little bit about sort of this shift from the ladder to the ripple effect here?
I'll try it, Laura. The For me, it's always been the ability to prioritize, right? Because as we move into teams, we have to identify who are the players and then go from there. And how do you effectively communicate? Because just because I think should be going this way doesn't mean that you think it should be going that way. And so, where do we find the common ground in order to effectively execute on whatever that project is? And nine times out of 10, if you're a leader, and I have been a leader in the private sector as well as the government, the priorities are going to change at all times. And a real leader should actually be behind the scenes, almost guiding as opposed to dictating. And that doesn't work anymore with the multiple generations we have that we're all working at. Everyone sees things differently. So we should all be mindful of that and really learn to listen, because we are bombarded with information all the time. So how do we grab that information and use it effectively?
Yes, I love that. That's a beautiful representation of thinking about, with all of this information, with all of the demands of our jobs, how as leaders do we sit behind the scenes, respond to some of that incoming and figure out, what is the priority? What do we want? Like and I think like what you said, knowing who the people are, knowing how we want them to feel and being really mindful about how we share the information and the impact it will have on others is so very important. Yeah, so Thurla, good to have you on. For me, the transition from ladder to the ripple effect promotes and encourages input from all levels. And I think that that's very true. And I think that when, we think about ourselves in leaders from like, I'm the leader of this team, then it sort of feels like, oh, my influence is with the people who report to me or who I interact with on a regular basis. Whereas if we think about like, okay, what is the impact I want to have? That kind of goes to like whatever human I'm working with, right? If it's somebody who, regardless of their position, internal, external to the organization. So when we think about influence in this way, it's really setting ourselves up to be able to have influence with a broader audience as well. Yeah, I love that. Anything else coming up for anyone on the call? One of the things when I actually started kind of framing leadership this way about 3 years ago, and the first organization, I guess I just felt like taking a risk. The first organization I worked through this model with was a police force in Arlington County. And when I came back with them again, they were like, can we talk about that again? Because that really resonated. And I was like, okay, I think we're on to something. Like if they're willing, if they're feeling it, we can do something with this here. But I think about this so much, like even as you said, Delia, like when we think about like the changing generations, I really think about this a lot because I work with organizations who have a lot of early career professionals who feel like, they have different needs, they have different desires, they have different ways they want to connect in organizations. And I feel like we're reaching a bit of a tipping point where they occupy a large enough set of the workforce, but also we all actually benefit from it when we take this more human approach to work, when we think about our impact and then how we can create better experiences and more positive influence through that. Everybody really gets to see the benefit. So when I think about leadership and I think about how we develop as leaders, I look at it in three buckets. The first is, and I think it's really first and foremost, is leading self. So for anybody who was like, I'm not in a leadership position yet, but I want to be prepared to be in a leadership position, or I want to be able to have, more influence with the people on my team, it all really starts with leading self, because how we show up and like that ripple effect that we have is going to be the most foundational piece about making choices and being intentional about how we then lead others. Right? So when I know myself, when I'm connected with myself, when I'm doing the work on who I am and how I show up, that gives me a lot more opportunity to be thoughtful and flexible and intentional when I'm working with another person, right? Because if I'm grounded in myself, I know who I am and I can see what somebody else might need. I can say, okay, this is where I might have to, shift a little bit and flex a little bit to this other person because it will really support our working relationship. It will have that more positive impact. It will build trust. And as Nayli said in the chat, it's about building empathy, compassion, putting people, really stepping into somebody else's perspective to be able to say, how can I meet you where you are? How can I serve you and what's going to create the best opportunity for the partnership and for the other person? And then the other piece of it that we bring is leading teams, right? And when I talk about leading others, I'm talking about the interpersonal side. When I'm talking about leading teams, I'm talking about that bigger picture, either team or organization, just depending on your role or what that means to you. But that's really thinking about, okay, now how do we do this on a more collective level, right? How do we do this when there are multiple personalities and preferences and values and opinions? And again, I think we often talk about models that bring us into actually start with the leading teams piece, right? And we're like, all right, we're going to go learn how to lead our teams. Valid, very important. And if we don't get grounded in who we are, how we're showing up, the impact we're having, how we're building relationships with individuals, how we're ensuring that we are being fair and equitable on our teams with other people, we're not going to have as big of an impact or influence when we're leading our teams. Right? So you just want to offer that when we think about, we're going to do a little bit of self-reflection in a minute, and we think about it, it's because when we get to know ourselves is when we then can say, okay, like, what do I need to do here? What do I need to be aware of? What do I need to look out for? As far as I can tell, this is a lifelong process. I've been in self-development and leadership, leading self for a long time, and there's always more to learn. And of course, it's not something we do like one at a time. It's very much, we're kind of always working on all of these things, but I am going to invite you to do a little self-reflection, because when we are with our teams, we'll have some influence with what we say, right? We say things, people will listen, tasks will end up on plates, things will happen, but it is the lowest level way to carry influence, right? And especially if what we say doesn't align with how we actually show up. Right. So if it's just very common thing I hear all of the time is people will say, well, the senior leadership isn't holding their team accountable. They need to go hold their team accountable. So when we think about that, my first question is, how are they seeing you hold people accountable? Right. So we can say, go hold your team accountable. But if we're not also doing it, one, it holds less value for our team, right? If we say do it, but they don't see us doing it, they're not going to value that input as much. But the other thing is people need to see you doing it in order to learn how to do it. So much of our influence actually comes through modeling, right? So if I say to you, hey, go make sure you're doing check-ins with your team and help them prioritize their tasks, but I'm not actually having that interaction with you, and I'm not meeting with you or helping you prioritize your tasks, what I'm saying is going to hold very little weight. Both from are you sure we really value that around here? Because that's not actually been my experience. And like, I actually don't know how to do it, and I don't even really know how to ask for help. Right? So when we take that next step, our next level of influence is going to come through what people see us doing, right? And people are going to do what we do. In particular, when our role does have that level of influence, right? Where people are depending on us to teach them, train them, show them, model, make it feel safe, make it feel, take out or allow the space for vulnerability. The more we're doing something, for good or for bad, right? If people are seeing, better or worse, like people are seeing us do something, then that's more likely what they're actually going to do, right? And so then what we really want to sit in, and with that sort of that ripple effect, is who do we want to be? Not just what do I want to do, but what is the energy I want to bring to it? What is the atmosphere I want to create through my words, my behaviors, my actions, my commitments, my processes, my accountability? All of those things really contribute to that energy that radiates out around us and the impact it has on the humans that we work with. Again, it's about how we human together in the workplace. And so really thinking about, what is that energy that I want? It doesn't, there's no right answer here. I just really want to be clear. Like, this is part of knowing self and leading self, is knowing, what feels good to you, what you like, what comes naturally to you and what doesn't, where you might want to grow or where you might want to lean in a little bit more, right? So I want to just emphasize, part of being human in the workplace is that we are all unique and we bring different likes and values and perspectives and experience. And all of that will shape that piece around who and how we want to be with the people that we are interacting with and engaging, and ideally having some positive impact and influence with, right? So just really thinking about, how do we shift? It's an interesting, one of the things I was thinking about this morning, and I'd love to hear from all of you because you all are training professionals, right? Is when we talk about training, we're actually leaning into the say part, right? Like, we are really focusing on, the words that make sense, the theories that we're like, yeah, that makes sense, right? We need to hold each other accountable. We need to give good feedback, and we need to be intentional with our workload, and we need to manage our time and all of these things, right? Like, we can say that, but the application is the doing, right? It's the takeaway. It's saying like, okay, that's why, like, when I train, I always tell, like, take like the one thing you need and practice applying that. If you leave all of the rest of it behind, but you actually get a little bit better at one thing, or you actually apply one thing, that's actually the win. Right. And I think that is like, we have to think about that with our training, because even with like leaders that I work with, a lot of them will say, I had one just come back from one of the Harvard trainings actually. And he was just like, it was such good training. It was amazing. And he was like, I want to go do another one. And I was like, yes, do another one. And let's go back to the one you just did, right? And let's take it from what you learned to how you're applying it with your team, so that they can see it in action, and so that it can influence how you're actually showing up and what we're actually creating in our workplaces. Right. So I'm actually going to pause there because I'm really curious kind of what's coming up for those of you on the call, what's hitting, what's not, and I'm also going to pop over to the chat. Yes. Knowing yourself is freeing. It's interesting too, because, there's a lot of it, mostly in the personality kind of assessment theories, but, a lot of emphasis on, the more I actually know myself and value and appreciate who I am, the easier it is to flex to other people, because it's not from a place of have to. It's like, yeah, I get it. This is who I am. I like who I am, and I'm grounded in it, and I'm willing to adapt to bring somebody else along. Yeah, what people see or perceive from our actions. It might not be the truth, but it is their truth. And I think that's a piece that is so important to really acknowledge as much as like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. That's not what I meant to say. That's not how I wanted that person to feel. But only we know our intentions, right? Everybody else knows our impact. And it is our responsibility to align our intentions with our impact so that we can really be more in that being space in like because the being isn't just like how I actually want to be, but it's also like what are people actually experiencing of me, right? Confidence in what you know can also be a way to influence. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. All right, so I would love to hear from you. Let's do a little fill in the blanks. Let's do it in the chat. Yeah, the ability to not just talk about it, but give examples is how people connect. Yeah. Ooh. Nellie just shared a link in the chat. How to balance compassion and boundaries. I'm like, I want to click on it, but I'm like, don't want to mess up my screen here. So just keep that up, Amy, before we check out so I can click on that later. Yes, I love it. Okay, so I would love to hear from you. When you are at your best, I am what? When I am at my best, I am fill in the blank. What are the words that resonate with you? What are the things that you feel when you are at your best radiate from you? Yes. Oh, I feel happy just seeing these things come in the chat. I'm thinking about like, how does it feel to reflect on, who you are when you're at your best? Because just seeing the words in the chat, like, give me a little bit of warmth there. Yeah, energetic, at ease, happy, efficient, engaging, and excited. Yeah, happy, confident, fearless, at peace. Love these. Empowered, patient, respectful, understanding, compassionate, energetic, fulfilled. Yes. Satisfied. And I want you to think about when you're in that being space, when you're at your best and you're able to show up satisfied or from an energy of fulfillment and energetic and patient and respectful and empowered and fearless. When you are those things, the energy that comes off of you, like how that affects how you show up in the world. You don't have to share it in the chat, but I think I do a lot with leadership development in terms of helping people find that energy in a way, and then like kind of sit in it, like just sit in it, visualize it, invite it in when we're having like on the days that are feeling harder, how do we create some of that? Because as we know, like emotions are contagious. And when we can show up and feel those ways, we can also create more of that for others. Okay, so now let's get real because there are things that interfere with being at our best. What are some of the things that interfere with being at your best? What gets in the way? Yeah, imposter syndrome, time constraints, fires that come up that need to be put out, being tired, feeling underappreciated, waiting on others. Yes. Yeah, competing priorities, lack of resources, unscheduled tasks, workload. Yes. External interference. Yeah. Not enough time in the day. Problem children. Yeah. Me sometimes, right? Listen, sometimes we just have off days without even a whole lot of reason behind it, right? Yeah, so I mean, I think these things are very real. You know, some of the things I hear the most are last minute fires, you know, things that could have been weren't necessarily fires 2 weeks ago or now have now risen up to the top and are urgent. Overwhelm, you know, feeling like we're forcing to get things done, you know, things that um, you know, other people's energy and behavior. Absolutely. All right, so last one. When I am not at my best, I am what? So when these things happen and we're feeling overwhelmed or we don't have enough spaciousness or we're feeling forced to get things done and we're on a time crunch, what? Oh, yeah. Yeah, frustrated. For me, the biggest trigger for me not being my best is the time crunch. And I know that like when I'm at my best, I'm like patient and spacious and trusting that everything's going to work out just fine. And then when I get on my time crunch and I get overwhelmed, then I am just impatient, snappy, and not my best self. Yeah. Overwhelmed, not focused, stressed, impatient. Yeah. Isolated, disappointed. Yeah. See some agreements with others up there, stressed and unfocused. And yes, for me, it ends up being a bit of a cycle because I'll be unfocused, which then I'll start multitasking, which makes me more anxious and less focused. And it just becomes a little bit of a downward spiral there. All right, lack of productivity. Oops. So yeah, let's notice, I'm gonna go back. Let's notice that these things are very real, right? This is a human experience. I remember, I mean, not even that long ago, I had a boss tell me to like leave my emotions at the door. And I was just like, you know, I get it. I get it. We don't want our personal lives or our emotions or things to interfere with our work, but it's just not reality. We are human beings having a human experience. And sometimes that means that something in our personal life is going to have an impact on how we're feeling or how we're showing up. I think the more important thing is just to notice, right? To know when we are at our best and what that looks like, and also to know when we're not and why. Because one of the things that I have found is the biggest detriment to influence is how we show up when we're not at our best and how we impact other people because of the way we might interact when we're not at our best. So it's not about never being there. It's just about being really mindful about how we move through that and how we still engage because, as someone said earlier, so much of influence is actually based on trust, right? And so how do we trust how we show up together? So just something to kind of think about as we think about how we create influence from that human perspective in the workplace. And I know this was already brought up from my understanding is the first time this was really presented was in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's the circle of control or influence. So when we're thinking about how we show up and have influence, I love to hold this model because I think it's one of the most powerful ways to think about how we can create more influence through how we show up with people. So the first circle, the biggest circle, is things that we have no control or influence over. The second circle there is our influence, which is what we're all talking about today. And then that center circle is what's within our control. So let's start with that biggest circle. What goes in there? What are the things in our lives that we have no control and no influence over? Like what's going on around us? What's in our day to day that, or a bigger picture that we have no control over? Yeah, how other people act, or taxes. Isn't that the truth? Traffic, others, everything. Love it. Okay, see, a lot of people have other people in here. And I will say, I do believe we can't control other people. I do, but I'm not sure I believe that we can't influence other people. Yeah, the noise. Weather, yes. So things that we literally like, no matter what we do, no matter what we say, no matter how we show up, no matter what we spend money on, no matter what, things we cannot control are the, sort of those bigger things, the weather, traffic, public transportation, taxes, a lot of political things, organizational budgets. Most of us don't have any control or influence over those bigger picture things. Daylight savings is something I often wish I could control. Spend a lot of time talking about it, but I have zero control over it, right? So let's move into that circle of influence. Yes, Thurla, we cannot control the passage of time, right? What can we influence? When you think about things that maybe we don't have direct control over, but we do have influence over, what goes in there? Neely says me, our emotions, our work environment, our team, our colleagues, our schedule, other people, how they think and feel. Yeah. Great. And let's move into that circle of control. What falls into that smallest circle? The things we can control. Yeah. Magdalia says me, right? So the reason this is such an important model to sit in is because the research has shown that when we spend time and energy talking about things that we have no control or influence over, it can actually feel very overwhelming. It can make it very difficult to feel at our best. It can have a significant impact on our emotional well-being. And they're often things we spend quite a bit of time talking about, right? Policy, budget, traffic, weather, right? They're things that they're almost go-tos inside of a lot of conversations, right? And so it's important to recognize the impact that it could potentially have. When we go to that center circle, the things we can control, it's me, it's how I react to things or how I respond to things, the words that I choose, the training that I take, how I apply it, all of that, like it's how I react to things, what I say yes to, I don't always have control of that, but how I manage my time, all of those things are within our control. And when we focus on that circle, two things happen. Probably many things happen, but we're focused on two. One is that circle starts to feel bigger and bigger, which means our capacity to actually show up in the way that feels better to us also gets higher. Right? So if I feel like if I'm focusing on things I have control over, I'm putting my energy and attention to those things, I'm minimizing how much time I'm spending focusing on things I can't change. It actually increases my ability to have that positive impact and therefore influence. The bigger our circle of control gets, the higher level of influence we have, right? Influence is how people respond to us, how well people listen to us, trust us, follow our leadership, engage in those conversations. And the more we are able to focus on what we can control, the bigger that circle of influence gets, right? So really thinking about the question I love to ask when I'm thinking about circle of control is what's mine? Like inside of this circumstance, what is mine? What can I actually control here? What is my responsibility? I also like to ask the question, what is my role in this? So in particular, like in conflict or when there's, disagreement about resources or whatever lots of things come up at work is what is my role in this? It's not, if we're focusing on someone else's role in it, we might want to spend a little bit of time thinking more about our own because it creates that higher sense of empowerment and higher opportunity for influence. Yeah. So when we think about influence, I really want to just kind of emphasize how much that comes from how well we sit in that circle of control, which again is like a pretty significant piece of that self-leadership conversation, that foundational piece around how we lead ourselves, the decisions that we make, our emotional well-being, how we care for ourselves, that will have a big impact there. And I actually don't think we talk about that enough in the workplace. I think we talk about, how we structure our sentences and how we delegate and how we, structure a feedback conversation. But I think the foundational piece here is more around that, like, how am I showing up? What are the decisions I'm making? How are they impacting other people? How am I building trust or breaking down trust? And those are the central pieces when we think about the ripple effect of how we gain influence through our leadership. So I just want to pause right there and see if anybody has any like thoughts or reactions or anything that is on your mind before we move into some like specific tools for building influence. Still centered in the human perspective, the human experience though.
They have 5 years, it's 5 years within the Foreign Service toward tenure, right? I mean, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I think I think your volume might have started in the middle of your sentence. And now I can't hear you. I'm not sure if your mic's not working right now, but if you want to come back, let me know. Anybody else have thoughts or reflections on this? Okay, so we're thinking about building influence from this ripple effect, human-centered way. And I would actually encourage you to layer this on top of, like, there's plenty of different ways to think about influence. Layer this human sort of side into maybe the more like tactical or tools-based things that, you've probably seen or heard or read before. Because I actually don't think it's one or the other. I just think the human side doesn't get enough attention oftentimes, quite frankly. And I also always like say to leaders, like, I know you have a job to do, right? You have a to-do list, you have tasks, you have things you have to get done, and make leadership part of that to-do list, right? So that leaning into some of these more human-centric pieces, there is space for it. For most of us, it's not going to be our full-time thing all the time, but we need to make space for it. And these keys are ways we can build influence through our day-to-day interaction in our work with our staff. Or with our teams, with the people. So there's 3 keys that I have found over and over again consistently support people's ability to have that positive impact and influence. The first is taking time for connection. I think it's something that's significantly lacking for a lot of people right now, in work and beyond. And it's a way that we really create that opportunity to build trust and to know both ourselves and others, and then what we can do to work better together. Connection is so significantly important. The second one is curiosity. And curiosity is all about, as leaders, letting go of having answers and leaning into the expertise around us. I think oftentimes as leaders, we're sort of trained to have the answers as humans, and even though the sort of the social constructs we're brought up in, like we're graded on having the answers, right? When we're thinking about having more influence in our work, it comes from asking better questions. So how can we lean into curiosity to create more influence? And then the third one is consistency. It's about how do we create a sense of predictability and stability for the people around us so that they kind of know what they're going to get with us, right? Like that they kind of know, they can trust that when we show up together, it will be a pretty consistent experience. So let's dig into these and what they look like and how we actually do it. So when we think about connection, it's about how we enhance the human element. It's about how we spend time with people in a way that helps them feel seen, heard, and valued, right? So this goes beyond just you know, I heard what you said, but it's like, I know who you are, or I care who you are. You know, obviously we're complex, people are complex, it takes time, but it's about creating spaces to show each other that we're valued, that I care about you, that I care about your preferences, I care about your skill set. I want to know what's important to you. I want to know what you want to work on. I want to know what you want to contribute. Uh, it makes people feel very centered in the work, right? Which then makes them feel more connected to the work. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the things that are getting in the way of connection right now? I'm not, I mean, most people would agree. It's okay. And if you don't, I want to know what you're doing, because it would be like that we're more and more disconnected, right? People are feeling more and more disconnected. So what are some of the things that get in the way? Yeah. Teleworking, right? We know, people tell me, like, I work with a lot of groups that are hybrid or virtual. And I always say, like, what's the best thing about being virtual? And they all say, no commute, right? And I say, what's the worst thing about it? And they say, disconnection, right? Not feeling as connected to the team, to the work, to the mission, to each other, to the other tasks that are like the projects and everything that's going on. Generational gaps. Yeah. Need for solitude. Yeah. People choose not to get involved. Things that we used to just kind of default to doing in person, now a lot of people like don't show up for it, right? It's like we don't create as strong connections virtually, but people aren't showing up in person the way they used to. Yeah.
And if I may, Laura,
Of
they
course.
choose not to get involved and then are the first ones to complain about it. So they're like stirring the pot even more instead of saying, well, here's a suggestion, or, but
Yeah.
they want to complain or complain about other people.
Yeah, and that sounds frustrating. So yeah, this is like really like, how do we create these spaces where we can create
So my
connection?
next question there is, do you have, because you brought GRB, you can see what Jeff sees?
Nope. I think we have someone that came on.
Okay. Okay.
So again, connection will help enhance that human element. There are a lot of things that get in the way of the human connection. A lot of we're hearing is like telework, virtual environment, hybrid environment, our lack of a tendency to get involved. And it's also, there is a lot of, technology. Even when we try to connect online, people are doing different things. People are, checking their phones even when we are together. It's so common. Like if you look at tables around you in a restaurant, like you're going to find a few at least where everybody's on their phones, right? Like that human connection is much more disrupted and splintered right now. And Melissa said it takes much more intention. We all need to want to make connections and make deliberate choices to do so. Yeah, doing a quick check-in or quick virtual call instead of an email. It does. It takes a lot of intention. And that's why I always say, like, we think about that circle of control. Like, it's so easy to jump out of it, right? And to think about what other people are doing. But coming back into, like, what can I control? What can we create? What can we set up? How can we, and it's not going to be perfect. It's not like we're going to do, we're not going to find something magical and everyone's going to show up, but there are ways of just kind of building those opportunities for connection that meet people where they are, which a quick virtual call or making sure people aren't doing other work when they're on virtual meetings, like they were actually together, right? Like all of that can really support the connection. So a couple just tips, and I just want my offer to you over these next few slides is just like pick one thing out of a how, one of these how sections, and try it out. See what works for you. In particular, if connection, curiosity, or consistency feel more top of mind for you in terms of what might support the level of influence you'd like to have. So taking time to check in, I work with teams to create actual systems and structures to have more impactful check-ins. Oftentimes people will say like, oh, we don't have time in our meetings to check in. We just need to get to work. And I think that's, again, it's placing the task ahead of the human experience, and that when we create that connection, we actually can get the work done more quickly and effectively because we're working better together, because we've taken some time to build the connection, to build the trust, to get to know each other. So it's like a little bit of a spend time to, it's like a bit of an investment in the future of the work, but can be really powerful for people. So building it into our meeting agendas, having a plan, like I work with one team where they just pick somebody every month and they do a quick check-in. I work with another team that does co-working time so that even if we're not in meetings, we're still spending some time together, right? So that we're seeing each other's faces and we're still working together because we're in that space together. I work with another team that does office hours, which is just an open call. It's an open Zoom room and people can pop in to ask questions to the CEO. And it gives people great insight into one, just connecting with each other in that space. And two, actually hearing about what other people are working on and what's kind of going on inside of the organization. Yeah, Meg says they do coffee breaks with their team. Yeah, great. Meg, will you put a little bit more in the chat around what that looks like and how you structure it? And then the last thing is follow up. It goes a long way with people when we share something or if they share something with us and then we check back in. We say, you know what? How is your mom feeling? How did that appointment go? How was that run that you participated in this weekend? How was that concert? Like when people tell us things and we remember and then we follow up, it creates a high level of connection, which then creates more opportunity for influence and effectively working together. So those are just a few ways. If you have other ways that you support connection on your teams, please throw it in the chat. I love, Meg, thank you for popping yours in there. Oh, you're not allowed to talk about work, talk about personal stuff. It's nice to get to know one another. Love it. All right, so that's connection. One way to increase your level of influence is to tend to that human element, make sure people are feeling seen, heard, and valued. It'll create that trust, which increases your influence. So the next one is curiosity. And I think curiosity goes a long way in empowering your team. So I think a lot of people are struggling with having enough space in their work. Like we are so overwhelmed with all of the things. And for many of us as leaders, it's a high level of responsibility to have the answers and get the work done. When we lean into curiosity, it says to our team, I actually trust you to get the work done. I'm sure many of you are doing this. But instead of telling people what to do or giving people advice, we can ask great questions that help people take more responsibility for their own work and dig into what they already know. And oftentimes just a little bit of encouragement can get someone really excited to take something on because you've helped them tap into what they can already contribute to a project. So that also then increases confidence and buy-in, right? If I'm invited to share my solutions, if I'm invited to share my ideas, I think as leaders, one of the most powerful things we can say is, I don't know, if, like, of course, like gonna go off, is to let go of having answers and actually just ask somebody like, I have some ideas, but I'd love to know what you think. Or, you're the expert in this area. What would you do? Or what are some of your ideas for the way forward? Right. So instead of feeling like you have to have advice and suggestions, which quite frankly, most people don't take anyway, right? We've probably all been in that position where we've like given someone advice. And we're like, I gave you advice. You didn't do it. Now I'm just frustrated that it didn't get done. Right. But oftentimes the advice we give might not resonate for that other person or might not be enough for them. So when we can let go of having answers and ask people like what they think, what they would do, what they want to do, it actually creates more influence for moving the work forward. So I often say to leaders, hey, if telling people isn't working, start asking. And when we talk about curiosity, we're talking about asking open-ended, judgment-free questions where, we just ask people like, oh, have you worked on something like this before? What did you find to be the best path forward? Or just things that are fair, that just neutral questions with open end, and help people tap into what they already know. Again, it increases their confidence and it also increases the buy-in. And then the last thing is really just less time talking and more time listening, right? When you give people lots of space to listen, they'll tell you who they are, what's important to them, any challenges they're currently having, any personal constraints that might need tending to, right? And I don't know about you, but like I would rather have people tell me that than have the working relationship not work out, right? I'd rather create a space where people felt they could share something with me to help make the work experience better. Because when we can do that in a way, and I'm not saying like, bend over backwards to try to like, accommodate people, but I am saying create space to really just understand what's going on for people so that we can be flexible in our work together. Listen, Shanda, that's like one of the most important things I ever learned. I learned it about being an extrovert on the Myers-Briggs, but it is that wait. Why am I talking? Right? We talk to fill space. We talk because we have answers. We talk because we like our own ideas. But it's so important to leave the space for other voices to come into the room. And sometimes that means, the 7-second rule means letting 7 seconds of silence go by so somebody can formulate what they want to contribute to the conversation, right? Like just getting comfortable with allowing that space is super powerful. And not easy, let's just say, especially for the extroverts in the room, 7 seconds can feel really quite long. So just understand, letting that discomfort be normal and valuing it enough to sit in it. All right, and the last one is consistency. So consistency creates that sense of safety and stability, which means like, I know who you are as a leader, who you said you are is who you actually show up and you are. And, I can see this over time. So now I feel a bit more comfortable and confident, which means I'm more likely to take risks. I'm more likely, a lot of like why people don't do, step out and like really take autonomy on a task is because they're afraid of what will happen if they make a mistake. But if we're consistently supportive, we show up in a way that they're not worried about how we'll respond if something goes wrong, people are much more likely to take that ownership, to feel safe in it, and to even take some risks on trying some different things. So just a couple of things that we can do here. One is just show up in a predictable way. As leaders, as humans in the workplace, it is our responsibility to be able to manage or to sort of that emotional energy, and then also to be able to be open and transparent if we're off. Like if something's different, if today's not the day, if you're like, listen, I'm really working on a few things, I don't have a lot of space right now, I know this will be a better conversation if we have it tomorrow. Like just being willing to be open and transparent, it creates that space for other people to be open and transparent as well. It kind of goes back to people seeing how you show up, seeing how you're willing to be open and transparent. Again, it creates that safety for other people to do it as well. And then, just also to own it. Sometimes I know I'll show up. I actually said to someone the other day, like, I just said that. It was not a value add, and I'm sorry. Like, really being willing to own it, notice it, and repair, right? To be able to have that conversation. So, because it is going to happen, right? Like, we are humans at work, like, we are humans in the world, like, things are going to happen. We will have bad days, we will have off days. We can't always just like close our door and not interact on those days. So just being able to clean it up if there is something that happens a bit out of alignment. All right, so I'm gonna just as a kind of quick review, as we think about building influence and we think about ways that we can create more of that ripple effect with our energy and our impact so that we create more opportunity to have influence. This one place to start is by focusing on these 3 keys: connection, the curiosity, or the consistency. And I would love to hear if anybody, I always like to have a quick takeaway, like do it tomorrow, do it you know, in the next 5 minutes, like kind of set an intention of anything that showed up for you where there's opportunity, right? Where there's an opportunity to maybe think about something a little differently or try something a little bit differently. And is there like one thing you might try? I would love to hear if there's anything that came up in any of our time together that you feel like, yes, I could see that creating an opportunity or having some impact on your ability to influence. Anybody willing to share like one thing? Yeah, ask for more input from others. I know like I have got a lot of ideas and I've been doing my work for a long time, which many of you have as well. It's very easy to go to answers and advice, right? It's harder. It's a skill set, right? To be like, wait, I'm gonna pause. What might I ask? What question could I ask here? Identify what helps you be at your best and nurture those things. That's beautiful. Yes. Yeah, knowing yourself first, doing a little self-reflection. Having the team. Oh, there goes the chat. Having the team share reflective statements to build understanding and connection. I love that. And those I statements are so powerful because they truly are speaking on our own behalf, right? And it really emphasizes that we are all different. We all bring different things to the table. And it's not a collective, like it's not this royal we, right? It's like, no, this is who I am. I want to know who you are. And it does build that opportunity for connection. Don't be afraid to ask questions to bring clarity. Yeah, spend less time focused on things I can't control. Absolutely. Great. Well, that is what I have for you. Thank you so much for hanging out for this last hour 20 or so. If you want to connect, that's where you can find me. I send about every other week newsletter and I'm on LinkedIn. Not super active, but I am there. It's a great place to connect. And I would love to connect with you in either of those ways. And we still have 10 minutes. So if anybody has any questions or anything you want to share or any final thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Yeah. Thank you all. I'm so glad you were here. Yeah, Thurla, go enjoy those mints. I wish we were together. I would hand them all out. My favorite.
Oh, I have a couple minutes. I'm going to drop some links in the chat too. That Crucial Conversations one for you, Laura, so you can click on it now.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
And then some other links to our upcoming events and registration for TOC. So stay tuned. I'll drop those in the chat in just a minute.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Yay. Glad to connect with you, Nayli. Yeah, thanks for being here. So fun. When I wrote this for TOC, I didn't realize I was going to get to do it again.
Well, it's such a great session. We're glad to be able to have you back.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording.
Yeah.